Welcome to the very last episode in our underwater Stitchy make-along, and I thought we should finish up with some blings. So I've pulled out the gold lame and my gold colored knitting yarns, and that's what I'm going to be using. I promised a treasure chest, and I'm making a treasure chest. So I've already done a little bit of sketching there, coming up with some ideas, and I started out by drawing a cube. Do you remember learning how to draw cubes like this? Maybe when you were back in school. You start with a rectangle and then you make those angled lines coming out of it. I think there are quilt patterns that use this similar type of shape as well. I drew that, but in the end I didn't end up using that shape at all, but it's there to give you an idea. So I've picked this spot here for my treasure chest, sort of tucked in underneath the Kraken's tentacle there, and I've pulled out a selection of sort of neutral color pieces of cloth that I thought I might audition to see what I want to use for my treasure box. I've brought out quite a few of them. I'm not really sure what I'm looking for, and some of them, these two seem a little bit light. Maybe let's see if something darker feels better. What other colors do I have here going on? This one, let's see how this dark brown piece feels. Well, that seems a little bit too dark, I think. Not exactly what I'm looking for. Let me rummage around here and see what else I can find. Let's see what else. How about this one? That one looks like it has a nice wood grain. Maybe that'll work. But yeah, no, I'm not feeling that one really either. What else? What else? What else do I have here? This one? I think that one's too dark again. This one? Maybe. A little bit red. Maybe it's a little bit tall. I'm not sure. Let me think about that some more. This one, yes, I think this one. I know it's dark, but I really like the horizontal lines. I think I'll go with that one. I think I'm going to use this dark brown thread and just a single strand, because the thread in this case doesn't really need to be decorative. I just want it to be there to sew this piece of cloth down. And I noticed that the cloth itself, it was fraying a lot at the top and the bottom. The threads were coming loose, so I folded it over so I have a folded edge there. Don't often do that. I usually work with a raw edge, but I folded the edge over at the bottom so that those unravelly threads are going to be secured in the background there. We don't have to worry about them, so I can just do a running stitch along the bottom here. And you'll notice that I've placed this at an angle, at a jaunty angle. I kind of like that rather than doing it straight across as if it's sitting on something really flat, because the ocean floor is not necessarily flat. So it's hung up on something on the ocean floor there and sitting at an angle. I like that look. And I'm going to stitch just with regular running stitch, and I don't mind if the stitches show. I don't want them to be really prominent, but I don't mind if you can see them. It all adds to the patina and the look of aged wood that that has been sitting under the ocean for a long time. And I don't even mind if the sides unravel a little bit, because that to me feels like the way that old wood planks would look, that they would be a little bit uneven on the ends there. So I feel like that's all adding to that look, and I really like this little scrap of this kind of grayish brown fabric with those really subtle lines, horizontal lines in it. I think it's perfect for a wood looking box here. So I'm not going to stitch all the way up to the top because I want to leave the top edge open for now, and I will finish sewing it down later on. And that the top edge will also get folded over so that you don't see the unravelly bits on the top edge. But before I do that, what I want to do is I want to add some of this yarn, the sparkly yarn, and by not sewing all the way to the top, I can tuck the ends of this yarn into the top there so that they disappear into my my chest, and all you see are the bits that are hanging out. So because this particular thread, it's not really embroidery thread, it's meant for knitting, it's quite thick, and I think it would be not very fun to try to sew through the cloth, and I don't know how that would work. I think it would start to shred and come apart. So I'm using what's called couching. So I'm using a thread, the same brown thread that I used to sew down my chest. I'm sewing around and around and around the yarn to secure it to my cloth here. In hindsight, it might have been a good idea if I had done this part before I sewed the chest onto the background cloth. I think it would have been less fiddly, but oh well. This is what I'm working with now, and it'll all work out in the end. It's just a little bit more fiddly this way. But if you're making a chest and you're sewing some threads onto your chest like what I'm doing here, then I would recommend sewing them on before you attach it to your background. I'm going to leave that thick yarn there with the ends still hanging out, and I've also got this other yarn here. The strands come apart, and I think each of these narrow strands I might be able to actually thread through a needle. And let's see, that's one try. Two tries. I think I'm going to have to do this off camera, but I did manage to get the thread through the needle, and I'm using a fairly short length because this yarn as well, it's not really meant to take the friction of going in and out of the cloth. So I don't want a really long thread that's going through there many times, because it might end up shredding, but we'll see if I can get away with using just a short thread and pulling it very gently and see if that will stay together, if it will hold together long enough to create a chain. And I'm using chain stitch to create this chain. Makes sense, right? There's also something called cable chain stitch that would make an interesting looking chain as well, but it's a little bit more fiddly, I think, than doing a regular chain stitch. So I don't want to do anything too complicated with this very fragile sort of delicate yarn that I'm using, not for its intended purpose. And we'll see how this goes. And it seems to be working out quite well. It's a little bit hard for me to see all that glinting from the shiny threads, or it's making it hard for me to see, but I managed to finish off that first bit. And now I'm doing another chain hanging over the edge, and I've abandoned the chain stitch. It was a little bit hard for me to see where to put my needle, and I'm using stem stitch here, which is like the back side of back stitch. And this particular chain is going to be hanging over the side edge of my chest here. So I've got it starting at the top, and it's going off to the side, and it will disappear around the side of the chest. But you can see here that I've just decided that I'm not going to do a complex shape for the chest. It's just going to be a square of cloth so you can't see the sides or into the chest here, and that's perfectly all right. I think that doing a simple chest like this does work well, and it gives the effect that I want it to give. Now let's see if I can thread the needle this time. No, nope, not that time. Second attempt. Is this going to work? Let's see. Ha! That time I managed to get it on the second try. So I'm starting these threads right at the top of my piece and then coming down sort of roughly in a direction that points straight down, remembering the rules of gravity, that things tend to hang down rather than off to a side unless it's in motion at the time. And I'm not planning where they're going to go. I just pick up my piece and just start somewhere. But I am thinking about making sure that things are not all lined up. So I don't want them to all be the same length. I don't want them to all be the same width. And at this point, I'm starting to think about overlapping the chains, because right now, as you'll notice, they're all kind of side by side, but there's no overlaps or interactions between them. And that's sort of one of the one of the ways that you can tell whether somebody's a trained artist or not. So young children and people who don't think like an artist tend to put all their things side by side. None of it overlaps with other pieces. But trained artists know that things are sometimes behind other things and there's interactions, especially if you're creating something that's very chaotic and messy. Some pieces are going to be in front of others. And I've abandoned all plans to use fancy stitches. And I'm just using the stem stitch for all of them. But here you'll see that I overlapped this particular chain with the heavy chain that I did in the first place. So then now you're starting to get some interaction and some entanglement with between the chains there. And I don't think that this looks great right now, but that's quite all right. It doesn't have to look good at every stage along the way. I know that I can always add more, and that the more I add, the more interesting it will become. And now I've decided that I've had enough of doing the chains and I'm going to do something else. So I've cut off a piece of the gold lame and I'm going to tuck it into the the chest there. Now this gold lame fabric, the ends unravel really easily, so I want to make sure that the cut ends off the cloth are buried well in behind that chest there, so that they're not going anywhere and they're not going to start coming out and unraveling more. And that's why I left that top edge open, because I knew that I wanted to tuck this gold piece in behind there. And I like the way it looks sticking out like that. Now, you may not have gold yarn or gold thread and gold lame fabric at home. And as you see, you only need the teeniest, tiniest pieces of it. So how might you acquire something like this? I mean, I don't think it would be worthwhile going out and buying yarn and thread and things like that for doing this. Maybe you have other things at home that you might be able to use instead. So at this time of year when people are doing their holiday decorating, there's so many gold ribbons and gold trim and things like that and tinsel that are around. Maybe you have some in your house if you decorate your home for the holidays, or maybe you have in the past. Maybe you can use some of that. Or maybe you come across some short lengths of gold ribbon in your travels. Or ask around, ask your friends and family, maybe they have some. But one other thing that you might want to think about doing, and this isn't for everybody, but you could certainly think about it, if you have a yarn store in your area, you may be able to go in and ask them for a swatch. Now, this is something that when I was in design school, we had to learn how to do. I remember our design teacher, and none of us wanted to do it. She said, you just have to get used to going into a yarn store and asking for a swatch. They don't know what you're doing. Maybe you're making a bridesmaid dress, or maybe you're a couturier and you're going to be making somebody's special New Year's Eve gown, and you're collecting some little samples to show to your client to give them some choices before you commit to buying a whole piece of it. And if you ask with enough confidence and authority, they'll usually give you a smallish piece of the cloth, probably about the size that I cut off for this piece. So that might be a way to acquire some gold fabric. But another thing that you could do, if you happen to have metallic paint in your house, either watercolor paint or acrylic paint, you could maybe paint a piece of lace, take a piece of white lace and paint it with some gold paint and stitch that down. So I'm starting to like the way that this is looking. It's kind of blingy, but I think that my box needs a lid. So again, I'm auditioning some little pieces of cloth there to decide what I might want my lid to look like and where I might want to place it. And I think that the positioning there, I like the way that the positioning is, but I think that that piece of cloth was too dark. And I don't have any more of that stripy stuff, but I have this piece, which is in a similar color tone, even though the pattern is very different. It's a very different piece of cloth, but it's very similar in tone. And when I put some stitching on, I think it will blend in quite nicely. So yeah, I think that that one works. And this one has the benefit that the edges are not coming unraveled immediately, so I don't have to worry about folding it over. So I think I'm going to put it there and then stitch it down with some running stitches, a couple of rows of running stitch, similar to what I did with the box. And I can always add some blanket stitches around the edges if I want to secure the edges down, but for now I'm just going to do a couple of rows of running stitch. And there I've given up on my thimble. It was just getting in the way and my threads were getting hooked on it. And I finally remembered to move that bright yellow piece of paper out of the way. Good for me. Two things done there. I like the way that this lid here sort of looks like it's slid off and it's also at an angle. It feels very relaxed and natural rather than having things lined up quite precisely. Yeah, and as I add more to this piece, I like it more and more and more. I'm really enjoying it. Now, you know what I think would be really cool? What I really wish is that I had some sequins. Unfortunately, I don't think I have any sequins, but I can add more of this chain stuff. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tuck it in behind the gold lame there. So I've left that top edge open as well, so I can tuck things in. So it looks like it's now, instead of coming straight out from the edge of the box, it's now coming out from behind that pile of gold lame, whatever that is, in my container here. So I've gone back to the thicker yarn, and I'm using the couching stitch to go around and around and around the edges of it. I've switched to a darker red burgundy color thread, and you might think that's an odd choice. Well, the brown was a bit of an odd choice too. You can certainly use a thread that would blend in more with the gold yarns, but I've chosen to use contrasting threads so that they add a little bit more texture, dimension, shadow lines, things like that. One of the things when I was working on this, one of the things that came to mind is that if you were painting something gold, you might do your underpainting in red. It's kind of a typical color to tone your paper underneath the gold area. And I thought that by using the red thread, that will have a similar effect. The red thread tones and blends well with the gold thread. So I don't know how much it makes a difference. I mean, you can certainly use a beige or a yellowy color thread as well. It's really up to you. You can try out different things. And this particular piece of gold thread that I'm using, the thicker gold yarn, I've made a slightly bigger piece. I have it winding around a bit, and you'll notice now that there's much more overlapping of the chains that are coming out of my chest there. There's a lot of overlapping. Man, I really wish that I had some sequins, but I haven't seen sequins in my house for years and years. I don't think I have any left, but maybe I'll try searching through my studio and see if I still have some tucked away in some dark corner somewhere. You never know what you might find, but right now I'll just finish sewing this on, looping it back and forth and around and all over the place. You know, none of this has to make any actual sense. It's just a tangle of stuff on the front of my chest here. And I like the way it looks. The more I add, the more realistic it seems to look. And I'm just thinking now that I want to make sure that all those loops don't come down to the same level, that some of them are shorter and some of them are longer than the ones beside it. But not much more planning than that. Some loops too, that's about it. Just the way, if you had a massive tangled chains, the way it would look. Yeah, maybe some beads. This would be a good place if I had some gold beads. They might work here too, but I don't really have any good beading needles. I know that I have beads in many colors, but I don't have good beading needles, so why do I keep the beads? Yeah, we'll see what I can find, if I can find some more blingy stuff to add. How about you? Do you have lots of gold things at home? Gold things that you could use here? You could probably actually attach actual chains on here too if you wanted. Not real gold ones. I think that that looks good, but I do think it needs more. What else could I add? Oh, look, look. See, I told you that this lame was really coming unraveled. So I just cut off some of the little bits, the ends of bits here. And this doesn't that look like tinsel? Doesn't it looks a lot like tinsel to me. So this is a way that you could use tinsel, is just bunch some up like that and just start sewing it down. That could work really well. Or like I mentioned, if you may be able to find gold ribbon or trim or other things like that, other decorative things like that, you don't really need very much. I don't know about you, but I was just thinking about a friend of mine who was telling me a story about going to a dinner party one time, and she really liked the napkins, the paper napkins that the host had provided, and so she snuck one into her purse, but the host noticed that she was doing it and asked her why she was taking the napkin, and it was for art purposes. So the host said, "You don't have to sneak them. You can just ask. You can have as many as you like." So, if you're going to parties at this time of year and there's there's gold potential art materials, maybe you'd like to ask your host if you could have a little bit of it. So that's looking pretty sparkly and spangly, and I quite like it. So I did look around my house. I found these gold seed beads and these moon-shaped sequins, but I do have this wall hanging that's full of gold sequins. So in the end, I decided to borrow quite a few of them from my wall hanging that I have on my wall, and I'm going to sew them onto my piece here. So these I think will be a lot easier to sew on than the moon-shaped ones because they have those holes in them. And so I just came up through the middle of the hole. I'm going in on the side and then coming back through the middle of the hole and then going in on the other side. And, 2 or 3 times through should work. And you might have noticed that I've switched to a yellow thread. I wanted this thread, I wanted to blend in with my sequins. I don't want them to stand out too much. So my goodness, those are fiddly, aren't they? So I'll sew on a few sequins here and there quite randomly on either side near the bottom there. And if there are any bits that I'm not particularly crazy about, I think that there was one area where the gold yarn was starting to shred. I might cover that up with a sequin and see how that goes. So now I've sewn on most of those sequins, and I decided that I am going to try sewing on one of those moon-shaped sequins just to give it a little bit more variety in shape and size there. And where might I put it? Tucked into the corner there? I don't know. Where am I going to put it? Let's see. I think I'm going to tuck it in here at the top there. Yeah, I think I'm going to tuck it in at the top there. And I'm just going to sew around it. And now I'm essentially going to be couching the sequin down because there's no holes and it's a little bit too hard to poke my needle through. You won't see a pristine moon there, but I don't mind. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's some decorative thing which has some lines on it. And I hope you've enjoyed this series. And there you go. There is my treasure chest. I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out, and I hope you like it. But I couldn't finish without showing you what the finished scroll looks like. I'll just turn on some music for most of it. I don't really have a whole lot to say, but I will pop in and point out a few recent additions. There's a teeny tiny little message in a bottle down there. I wanted to add a seahorse all year. Finally, I've added one in. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this series, and I will see you again really soon. Bye for now.